500 million years ago, beneath the surface of a pale and restless ocean, the very concept of terror was being invented. If you were to stand on the shore of the world during the middle of the Cambrian period, you would not recognize the planet you call home. The continents were barren stretches of fractured rock, scoured by relentless winds and bathed in the harsh ultraviolet radiation of a younger, brighter sun. There was no soil, no moss, no rustling leaves, no sound, but the crashing of waves against lifeless stone. It was a desolate, silent world above the water. But beneath the surface, hidden in the shallow, sunlit seas, life was undergoing the most spectacular and violent explosion of creativity in the history of our planet. This was a time before bone, before wood, before the familiar architectures of life had been settled upon. Evolution was experimenting with a wild, almost hallucinatory abandon, producing creatures with 5 eyes, animals armored in strange geometric plates, and worms that walked on stilt-like spikes. It was a world of the small and the strange, where the largest animals were often no bigger than your thumb, scurrying through the microbial mats that carpeted the seafloor. And into this world of tiny experimental forms, a shadow fell. A shadow cast by a creature so massive, so alien, and so exquisitely designed for destruction that it redefined the trajectory of life on Earth. It was the first true apex predator, the original monster of the deep. In relative terms, considering the microscopic scale of its environment, this predator makes the Tyrannosaurus rex look like a clumsy, overgrown baby. Before we dive deeper into the dark and ancient waters to meet this creature face to face, I want to take a brief moment to welcome you. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and it is my absolute privilege to guide you through these forgotten corridors of deep time. I have noticed that 71.9% of the people who watch these journeys into the past are not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find peace in these stories, if you enjoy wandering through the ancient world with me, please consider subscribing because it helps immensely and ensures we can continue unearthing these magnificent mysteries together. Now, let the modern world fade away. Take a deep, slow breath and let your mind sink back through the eons. The discovery of this prehistoric leviathan is a story of scientific confusion, shattered assumptions, and the slow, meticulous piecing together of a biological puzzle that took nearly a century to solve. It begins in the year 1909, high in the Canadian Rocky Mountains. A paleontologist named Charles Walcott was riding on horseback along a treacherous mountain trail when he stumbled upon a layer of dark, unassuming shale. When he split the rock open, he found something that defied all expectation, the exquisitely preserved remains of soft-bodied creatures from 500 million years ago. This site would become known as the Burgess Shale, one of the most important fossil discoveries in the history of science. But among the delicate imprints of ancient worms and bizarre arthropods, Walcott found fragmented pieces of something much larger, something that did not seem to fit the miniature scale of the Cambrian world. He found a strange, segmented appendage resembling the body of a bizarre headless shrimp. Because it looked so anomalous, he named it anomalocaris, meaning abnormal shrimp. In another layer of rock, he found a bizarre circular structure that looked exactly like a squashed pineapple ring, complete with a central hole lined with jagged teeth. He classified it as a type of ancient jellyfish and named it Peytoia. Elsewhere, other scientists found a large sponge-like body, which they dutifully classified as a sea cucumber. For over 70 years, these 3 distinct fossils were believed to be completely separate animals, swimming independently through the Cambrian seas. The idea that they could be connected was literally unthinkable, because connecting them would create a creature far too large, far too complex, and far too terrifying for the delicate ecosystems of the time. It was not until the late 20th century, during a massive re-examination of the Burgess Shale fossils by paleontologists Harry Whittington and Derek Briggs, that the truth began to emerge. As they carefully peeled back microscopic layers of rock using dental drills and fine needles, they found a specimen where the abnormal shrimp was attached to the sponge-like body. Then they found another where the jellyfish was attached to the front. The abnormal shrimp was not a shrimp at all. It was a pair of massive grasping appendages attached to the front of a head. The jellyfish was not a jellyfish. It was a terrifying circular mouth lined with razor-sharp plates. The sea cucumber was the creature's armored aerodynamic body, flanked by undulating flaps that allowed it to cruise through the water with terrifying speed and grace. The three pieces were not separate animals. They were the dismembered parts of a single colossal predator. When the complete creature was finally reconstructed, the scientific community was stunned. Anomalocaris was a giant in a world of dwarves. While most of its prey measured only a few centimeters, Anomalocaris reached lengths of up to 1 meter or over 3 feet. To a Cambrian organism, a creature of this size would have been as incomprehensibly massive as a living mountain. It was an apex predator in a way that nothing had ever been an apex predator before. Consider the Tyrannosaurus rex, the ultimate symbol of predatory power in our popular imagination. The Tyrannosaurus rex was magnificent, certainly, but it evolved in a world that already understood predation. It lived in an arms race with heavily armored herbivores, competing with other giant carnivores in an ecosystem where the rules of hunting and fleeing had been established for hundreds of millions of years. The Tyrannosaurus rex was a refinement of an old idea. Anomalocaris, however, was the invention of the idea itself. It introduced the concept of the active, visually guided swimming hunter to a world that was entirely unprepared for it. Its eyes were perhaps its most terrifying and magnificent feature. Anomalocaris possessed enormous stalked compound eyes, each containing up to 16,000 individual lenses. This level of visual acuity was unprecedented. In a world where most creatures could only distinguish light from shadow, Anomalocaris could see with high-resolution clarity. It could spot the tiny, scurrying forms of primitive arthropods on the seafloor from high above. It brought the deadly gift of true vision to the oceans, acting as a biological spotlight sweeping over the defenseless masses below. Imagine the ocean 500 million years ago from the perspective of a small, bottom-dwelling creature. You have spent your short life sifting through the mud, relying on chemical signals and simple touch to navigate your quiet world. Suddenly, a shadow blocks out the sun. The water around you shifts, pushed by the rhythmic undulation of massive lateral flaps. You do not have the cognitive capacity to feel fear as we understand it, but your nervous system registers an overwhelming, catastrophic disturbance. Descending upon you are two massive spined appendages, sweeping through the water like spiked nets. They grasp you with mechanical precision, pulling you upward into a circular, terrifying mouth that does not open and close like a modern jaw, but rather constricts like a jagged camera shutter, crushing your primitive armor in a geological instant. This was not merely an animal eating another animal. This was the birth of an ecological dynamic that would shape the rest of planetary history. Anomalocaris drove the first great evolutionary arms race. Because it existed, Other creatures were forced to adapt. They grew thicker shells. They learned to burrow deeper into the mud. They evolved their own complex eyes to see the monster coming. The pressure exerted by this single magnificent predator accelerated the diversification of life, carving the pathways of survival that every subsequent species, including our own distant ancestors, would be forced to navigate. When we look back across the vast, incomprehensible gulf of 500 million years, it is easy to feel entirely disconnected from these bizarre alien forms. They look like monsters from a science fiction film, completely divorced from the familiar biology of our modern world. But that is an illusion of time. The biological innovations introduced by Anomalocaris, the complex eyes, the active swimming, the specialization of limbs for hunting, echoed down the eons. The Cambrian Ocean was the crucible in which the fundamental rules of complex life were forged, and Anomalocaris was the hammer striking the anvil. To contemplate this creature is to contemplate the terrifying and beautiful indifference of deep time. The Earth did not care that Anomalocaris was the undisputed master of its domain. The planet simply provided the stage, and life played out its brutal, exquisite drama. The era of this first Leviathan lasted for millions of years, an immense reign of dominance that dwarfed the entire span of human existence. Generation after generation, these elegant monsters patrolled the shallow seas, their great compound eyes scanning the sunlit waters, their bodies perfectly tuned to the singular purpose of survival. We often think of ourselves as the pinnacle of a long, deliberate march of progress, the inevitable result of life struggling upward from the primordial soup. But the true story of life is far less predictable and far more humbling. It is a story of contingencies, of random mutations and environmental shifts that occasionally produce forms of breathtaking efficiency and power. Anomalocaris was not a rough draft or an imperfect prototype. In its time, in its world, it was absolute perfection. It was the undisputed ruler of a planet that had not yet learned to grow trees or form clouds as pollen, a world where the continents were silent and bare, and all the drama of existence was concentrated in the shallow, turbulent waters of a younger Earth. As you let your mind wander through the image of this ancient, flooded world, consider the sheer scale of the time that separates us from it. 500 million years. Mountains have risen and eroded to dust dozens of times over since Anomalocaris swam in the Cambrian seas. Entire supercontinents have assembled, fractured, and drifted apart. The stars in the sky have completed 2 full orbits around the center of the Milky Way galaxy. The sheer weight of that history is almost too massive to hold in the mind. It demands a kind of surrender, a letting go of our human-sized anxieties and preoccupations. Our lives are measured in decades, our histories in centuries. But the history of the Earth is measured in eons, and in the grand sweeping narrative of deep time, the rise and fall of the first apex predator is just one fleeting, beautiful note in a symphony that has been playing long before we arrived, and will continue to play long after we are gone. We are not the climax of the story. We are simply the current observers, the only creatures capable of looking back through the fossilized pages of the Earth's diary and marveling at the monsters that preceded us. There is a profound, almost intoxicating relief to be found in this realization. We spend so much of our lives weighed down by the burden of our own importance, obsessed with the immediate past and the anxious future. But when you stand on the conceptual shore of the Cambrian Sea and look out over the waters that hid the first giants, the petty concerns of the modern world simply dissolve. They cannot survive the crushing, magnificent weight of 500 million years. The Earth has been a stage for countless dramas, countless empires of bizarre flesh and primitive bone that rose, dominated, and eventually vanished into the geologic record. The Anomalocaris did not mourn its passing. It did not fear the deep future. It simply lived, a perfect expression of biological mechanics in a world entirely unconcerned with meaning. This absence of meaning is not a tragedy. It is a liberation. It frees us to simply exist, to witness, and to appreciate the profound improbability of our own consciousness. We are the universe waking up for a brief fleeting moment to look back at its own magnificent, terrifying history. And as we look back, we find not a chaotic void, but a chain of unbroken life, stretching through the dark waters of time, connecting our sophisticated, anxious minds to the cold, compound eyes of the very first hunter. The silence of the barren continents has been replaced by the noise of our civilization, but beneath it all, the rhythm of the ancient ocean still pulses. Let the vastness of that time wash over you. The world of Anomalocaris is gone, buried under miles of sediment, locked away in the high peaks of the Canadian Rockies and the silent stones of ancient seabeds. But the legacy of that world remains. Every time you open your eyes to see the world, you are using biological machinery that began its evolution in those ancient, sunlit waters. The predator that made the Tyrannosaurus rex look like a baby did not survive the shifting fortunes of the planet, but it helped set the rules of the game that we are all still playing today, allowing us to find peace in the simple fact that we are here, breathing, observing, and resting in the quiet shadow of deep time. To truly understand the magnitude of what this original Leviathan represented, we must carefully construct the theater in which it performed its brutal and beautiful ballet. The world of 500 million years ago was governed by physical rhythms that would feel intensely alien to our modern sensibilities. The moon, still gradually spiraling away from our planet, hung significantly closer in the ancient sky. Because of this lunar proximity, the gravitational pull was immense, dragging colossal tides across the barren shores. These were not the gentle waves that lull us to sleep on a modern beach, but massive churning walls of water that continuously scoured the continental shelves, stirring up nutrients and creating expansive, shallow inland seas. The days themselves were drastically shorter, lasting perhaps only 21 hours, meaning the cycle of light and darkness spun with a dizzying rapidity. The atmosphere above contained far less oxygen and lacked the protective ozone layer we rely upon today, bathing the sterile rock in lethal ultraviolet radiation. Nothing could survive above the waves. Life was a prisoner of the ocean, confined to the sunlit shallows where the water provided a necessary shield against the deadly radiation of the cosmos. It was within these protected shallow seas that the grand experiment of complex biology was being conducted. Before we look closer at the bizarre and tragic targets of this ancient hunter, I want to take a brief moment to speak directly to you. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and we are wandering together through these deeply forgotten corridors of deep time. I have noticed that 71.9% of the people who watch these quiet explorations have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find value and peace in these long journeys into the prehistoric world, please consider subscribing because it helps immensely and ensures we can continue unearthing these magnificent mysteries together. Now, let us return to the warm, shallow waters of the Cambrian period, where the invention of the food chain was fundamentally altering the trajectory of life. Before the arrival of our giant predator, the ocean floor was a relatively peaceful, if entirely stagnant, biological commune. For billions of years, life had consisted primarily of microbial mats, vast, slimy carpets of single-celled organisms that blanketed the sediment. The animals that did exist were simple, soft-bodied grazers that slowly crawled over this microbial garden, passively absorbing nutrients or gently filtering microscopic particles from the water column. There was no need to hide, no need to run, and no need to protect oneself. The concept of being eaten alive by a larger, faster, more intelligent creature simply did not exist in the biological vocabulary of the planet. It was a veritable Garden of Eden of simple organisms, but it was an Eden characterized by absolute evolutionary stagnation. Without the pressure of a threat, there was no reason to change, no reason to innovate, and no reason to grow more complex. The sudden emergence of the giant predator shattered this peaceful stagnation with the force of a biological meteor strike. The arrival of the abnormal shrimp meant that the slow, unprotected grazers were instantly obsolete. To survive in a world where a 1-meter-long monster with compound eyes and grasping appendages is actively hunting you, you must invent entirely new ways to exist. This was the spark that ignited the Cambrian explosion, the most dramatic radiation of complex life forms in planetary history. The predator did not just consume life. It functioned as the ultimate creative force, driving the rapid evolution of defense mechanisms that would forever change the anatomy of living things. Consider the trilobites, those iconic armored arthropods that would go on to dominate the ocean floor for the next 250 million years. Before the age of the giant hunters, a soft, worm-like body was sufficient, but under the watchful, terrifying gaze of the apex predator, the ancestors of the trilobites began to extract calcium carbonate from the seawater, weaving it into rigid, protective plates. They invented the exoskeleton, wrapping themselves in biological armor to deflect the crushing, circular jaws of their enemy. They also invented the defensive posture of enrolling, the ability to curl their bodies into tight, impenetrable spheres when a shadow passed overhead, hiding their vulnerable, soft underbellies from the spiked, grasping appendages of the hunter. Other creatures adopted even more bizarre and specialized survival strategies to cope with the sudden introduction of lethal violence. Consider Waiwaxia, a creature resembling a small, flattened slug, which covered its back in a dense array of interlocking scales and lethal upward-pointing spines, transforming itself into a prehistoric pincushion that would tear the delicate digestive tract of anything foolish enough to swallow it. Then there was Hallucigenia, a creature so profoundly strange that when paleontologists first discovered its fossilized remains, they reconstructed it upside down and backward. It was a worm-like animal that walked on pairs of stilt-like rigid legs, while its back bristled with long, menacing spikes. Every inch of its bizarre anatomy was a desperate, panicked evolutionary response to the terror of being hunted. But armor and spikes were only the most obvious physical manifestations of this ancient arms race. The most profound innovation driven by the emergence of the giant predator was not physical, but neurological. If you are being hunted by a creature with 16,000 lenses in its eyes, you cannot simply wait until it touches you to react. You must know it is coming. You must be able to sense the subtle changes in water pressure caused by its undulating flaps. You must be able to distinguish the chemical signature of its approach. Most importantly, you must be able to process all of this sensory information rapidly and coordinate a muscular response to escape. In short, you must invent a sophisticated nervous system. You must invent the brain. The brain is a remarkably expensive organ to maintain, consuming vast amounts of metabolic energy. Evolution would never have selected for such a costly piece of biological hardware if the environment were peaceful and predictable. The brain evolved as a direct consequence of danger. It was built to predict the future, to calculate the trajectory of a predator, to remember the hiding places in the rocky reefs, and to process the terrifying reality of vulnerability. The very capacity for anxiety, the mechanism that keeps you awake at night worrying about abstract future events, traces its deep evolutionary roots back to those soft-bodied Cambrian creatures desperately trying to outmaneuver the original monster of the deep. Our minds are the distant, heavily modified descendants of that ancient terror. As we drift over this reconstructed landscape of the mind, watching the desperate, beautiful scramble for survival playing out on the shallow ocean floor, it becomes entirely clear that death is not the enemy of life, but its silent partner. Without the continuous, looming threat of the giant predator, the ocean would have remained a stagnant pool of simple worms and microbial slime. The predator forced life to become fast, armored, perceptive, and intelligent. It forced life to wake up. The violence of the Cambrian Ocean was the chisel that sculpted the immense diversity of the animal kingdom. Every shell, every spine, every eye, and every primitive cluster of neurons was a direct response to the existence of the hunter. There is a strange and deeply comforting serenity to be found in recognizing this fundamental truth about existence. We often struggle against the hardships and pressures of our own lives, wishing for a state of absolute peace and uninterrupted comfort. We long for the biological equivalent of the pre-Cambrian microbial mat, a place where nothing demands our adaptation and nothing threatens our safety. But the history of the Earth tells us that true stagnation is the only real death. The pressures that shape us, the challenges that force us to adapt, are the very same forces that make us complex, resilient, and capable of experiencing the rich tapestry of consciousness. Let your mind rest on that thought for a moment. Imagine the cool, silent water of the ancient sea pressing gently against you. Look down at the scurrying forms of the trilobites, moving with mechanical purpose across the sand, completely unaware of the millions of years of history that will follow them. They do not know that they are participating in the grandest experiment the universe has ever conducted. They do not know that their desperate struggles to survive are laying the anatomical groundwork for fish, for amphibians, for reptiles, for mammals, and eventually for a species that will learn to dig their fossilized shells out of the cold rocks of the Canadian mountains. They simply live, fully present in the microscopic theater of their moment, reacting to the shadows in the currents, pushing the boundaries of biology forward one microscopic mutation at a time. The giant predator soaring majestically above them is not an agent of evil. It is simply a physical law of the new world, as natural and inevitable as gravity or the colossal tides pulled by the ancient moon. It sweeps through the water with an alien elegance, its massive stalked eyes processing the light of a younger sun, its body a perfect streamlined engine of consumption. To be consumed by it is not a tragedy, but a return to the cycle, a recycling of precious carbon and nitrogen back into the grand machinery of the biosphere. Everything in this ancient ocean is connected by the invisible threads of predator and prey, an intricate balancing dance that will sustain life on this planet for the next 500 million years. As the 21-hour day draws to a close, and the younger, brighter sun dips below the barren, rocky horizon of the lifeless continents, the shallow sea is plunged into a profound darkness. The giant predator continues its patrol, relying on the subtle shifts in water pressure to guide its terrifying appendages. The armored prey hunkered down in the sediment, their primitive nervous systems pulsing with the quiet hum of survival. The world is brutally challenging, utterly indifferent, and breathtakingly magnificent. And it is all happening in a silence so deep, so absolute, that it feels like the very beginning of time itself. Relax into that silence. Let the vast, incomprehensible distance between your modern life and this ancient, submerged reality serve as a buffer against the anxieties of the present. You are safe. You are simply observing the machinery of creation, watching the ancient shadows move through the deep water, knowing that all of this unimaginable struggle is exactly what was required to eventually produce a mind capable of understanding it. As the rapid 21-hour rotation of the primordial Earth brings the unfiltered light of the younger sun back over the barren continental rock, the shallow Cambrian Sea begins to warm. The water here is not the familiar, salt-balanced ocean of our modern era, but a heavy, mineral-rich primordial soup, dense with dissolved silica and calcium that the newly armored prey species are desperately extracting to build their defensive shells. Down in the twilight zone of the reef, resting upon a bed of ancient petrified bacterial towers known as stromatolites, the giant awakens. The anomaly, the abnormal shrimp, the apex predator that dwarfs every other living thing in its ecosystem, begins to stir. To understand the sheer terror and absolute biological majesty of this creature, we must resurrect its biomechanical reality. We must understand exactly how it moved, how it saw, and how it consumed, because its methods force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the evolution of hunters. Before we dissect the exquisite deadly machinery of this first true Leviathan, I want to take a short pause to welcome you into this shared space of exploration. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and it is a profound honor to be your guide through the unimaginable depths of planetary history. I have noticed that 71.9% of the people who find themselves drifting through these ancient stories have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find comfort in the vastness of deep time, please consider subscribing. It helps our small community grow and ensures we can keep unearthing the magnificent mysteries of the past together. Now, let the demands of the modern world dissolve back into the water, and let us focus entirely on the massive shadow rising from the microbial reef. When we think of a dominant predator, our mammalian biases conjure images of the Tyrannosaurus rex fighting a constant, exhausting battle against gravity to support its massive bone structure. The Anomalocaris, however, was liberated by the buoyancy of the primordial ocean. It did not need dense bones. Its body was an aerodynamic marvel, designed purely for forward momentum and surgical precision. Along its segmented body, it possessed a series of overlapping, highly flexible flaps. It moved through the water by undulating these lateral flaps in a continuous wave, a method of propulsion so incredibly efficient that modern robotics engineers study it to design autonomous underwater vehicles. This motion allowed the giant to hover silently over the seabed, maintaining absolute stability, or to accelerate with a terrifying burst of speed, leaving practically no turbulent wake. It was a stealth bomber made of soft tissue and hardened chitin, patrolling an ocean that had never before experienced the concept of an attack from above. At the very front of this hovering engine of death were the eyes. Before this precise evolutionary moment, the ocean was largely blind. The simple creatures of the seabed navigated by feeling the physical texture of the mud or sensing vague gradients of light and shadow. The Anomalocaris introduced high-definition reality to the biological world. Its enormous stalked compound eyes extended outward, providing a nearly 360-degree field of vision. With up to 16,000 individual hexagonal lenses in each eye, it processed the underwater world with a visual acuity rivaling the most advanced modern predatory insects. Imagine the neurological processing power required to interpret 16,000 simultaneous streams of visual data. This creature required a centralized nervous system, a brain capable of interpreting complex geometry, judging distance, and tracking tiny camouflaged prey against the textured reef. It was the absolute first creature on planet Earth to truly look at the world. The implications of this sudden visual dominance are staggering. In a blind world, you can survive by simply remaining motionless or moving at a glacial pace. But in a world constantly watched by high-definition vision, you have nowhere to hide in the open. You must bury yourself in the sediment, grow an impenetrable fortress of calcium carbonate, or rapidly evolve eyes to see the monster before it sees you. This relentless pressure is exactly why the Cambrian explosion is often referred to by evolutionary biologists as the light switch theory. The evolution of complex vision flipped a switch that brightly illuminated the ocean, forcing every single organism to adapt to a visible reality or face immediate extinction. The evolutionary arms race was no longer an arms race of mere physical armor. It was an information war fought with photons and optic nerves. Imagine the pure existential panic when an ancient trilobite looked up for the first time and saw the vast shadow of the hunter descending. The water vibrates with the rhythmic pulse of those lateral flaps. The two massive jointed appendages at the front of the head reach rapidly downward. These were not blunt, rigid claws. They were articulated, spiked, flexible limbs that could sweep through the water column like a net, gather struggling prey, and bend completely backward to deliver the victim to the mouth. And the mouth itself was a nightmare of geometric, merciless perfection. It was a circular, crushing disc composed of exactly 32 overlapping plates, arranged in a ring like a mechanical camera aperture. It constricted, drawing tighter and tighter, using those serrated plates to crack the newly evolved shells with terrifying efficiency. The sickening crunching sound of calcium carbonate breaking under the extreme pressure of those 32 plates was a completely new acoustic signature in the oceans. It was the literal sound of the complex planetary food chain being violently assembled. It is profoundly unsettling to realize that our modern perceptive abilities, our capacity to see colors, to judge distances, or to appreciate the beauty of a sunset, are evolutionary echoes of this violent arms race. We are visual creatures, primarily because our deepest ancestors were forced to become visual to survive the crushing jaws of the first Leviathan. Perception was not born from a philosophical desire to appreciate beauty. Perception was born from the absolute, uncompromising necessity of avoiding death. The biological mind awakened specifically to calculate the trajectory of a looming threat, but safely separated from that brutal reality by 500 million years of geological insulation, we can reframe this genesis. We can look past the terror and see the breathtaking elegance of the ancient mechanism. The anomalocaris was not cruel. Cruelty requires malice, an invention of much more complicated modern brains. The predator was simply a perfect expression of physical laws, an organism exploiting an ecological vacuum with mechanical purity. There is deep peace to be found in acknowledging the mechanical purity of that ancient world. We spend our incredibly short lives projecting human emotions onto nature, desperate to find a narrative that centers our subjective experience. But the Cambrian Ocean rejects our anthropocentrism entirely. It functioned with brutal perfection, eons before a human being looked up at the stars and asked why we are here. To contemplate the anomalocaris is to surrender the exhausting illusion of our own central importance. We are just one of the temporary shapes that carbon and water have assumed over billions of years of deep time. In that surrender, there is profound relief. You do not need to hold the universe together or endlessly justify your existence. The universe was managing its complex affairs 500 million years ago, and it will continue to do so long after our modern cities have crumbled back into dust and our names are forgotten. Let your breathing sink with the slow, undulating rhythm of those ancient lateral flaps. Imagine hovering suspended in that warm, mineral-rich sea, completely detached from the frantic pace of the modern century. The artificial deadlines of your daily life are less than microscopic whispers in the face of this geological silence. They simply do not matter here. Here, there is only the gentle push of the current, the filtered light of the younger sun, and the majestic patrol of the first giant. The anomalocaris glides through the water, a masterpiece of early biomechanical engineering, entirely unaware that it is altering the genetic destiny of the planet. It does not worry about its legacy. It simply lives, fully present in the unrepeatable moment of its existence. It is a living meditation on pure purpose and physical presence. As the 21-hour day draws to a close and the light begins to fade, the predator continues its silent flight through the darkening water, a magnificent ghost of an era sealed in fractured stone. Allow the comforting weight of that deep time to settle over your shoulders like a protective blanket. Let the temporary struggles of your day be absorbed into the vast, indifferent, and incredibly beautiful ocean of history. You are a momentary spark of consciousness, resting quietly on the shore of a universe far older and stranger than we can ever fully comprehend. The ancient sea is quiet now. The first apex predator fades entirely into the shadows, leaving only the rippling current, the sleeping trilobites, and the deep peace of a world that existed long before us, demanding nothing but your calm observation. To hold absolute power in the natural world is to invite your own obsolescence. For tens of millions of years, the anomalocaris drifted through the shallow, mineral-rich seas of the Cambrian period as an unchallenged king, a biological monarch in a kingdom of its own making. It was the apex of an ecosystem it had personally sculpted through the relentless pressure of its own hunger. But the engine of evolution, once ignited, cannot be paused or contained. The very arms race that the giant predator had triggered, the frantic, panicked rush toward harder shells, sharper spines, and faster nervous systems, was slowly building a world that would no longer require or even tolerate its original master. The ocean was fundamentally changing. The water was becoming more crowded, more complex, and more dangerous. The simple, sluggish prey of the early Cambrian were disappearing, replaced by highly defended fortresses of chitin and calcium carbonate. The trilobites were no longer soft and vulnerable. They had evolved into heavily armored tanks of the seafloor, covered in thick interlocking plates that could resist even the crushing 32-plated aperture of the great hunter. Before we witnessed the twilight of this magnificent prehistoric dynasty, I want to gently interrupt this descent into deep time. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and we are traveling together through these forgotten oceans. I have noticed that 71.9% of the people who watch these explorations have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find your mind calming as we sift through the ancient sands, Please consider subscribing because it helps immensely and allows us to continue unearthing these magnificent mysteries together. Now, take a deep breath, hold it for a moment, and let it out slowly as we return to the shifting tides of the late Cambrian world. The Anomalocaris was a victim of its own spectacular success. By forcing the prey to become faster and smarter, the predator had inadvertently engineered its own insurmountable challenge. But the threat to its absolute dominance did not just come from the heavily armored arthropods on the ocean floor. It came from the open water. Amidst the swirling, panicked schools of bizarre invertebrates, a new kind of creature was quietly testing the waters. They were infinitesimally small, entirely unimpressive, and seemingly defenseless. They possessed no thick armor, no crushing claws, and no serrated teeth. But deep within their soft, gelatinous bodies, they carried a revolutionary architectural secret, a stiff, flexible rod of cartilage running down the length of their backs. This was the notochord, the very first rudimentary blueprint of the spine. These tiny, wriggling creatures, no larger than a modern minnow, were the earliest chordates. They were our deepest, most distant ancestors. To the towering Anomalocaris, these ancient relatives of ours were nothing more than microscopic specks, fleeting morsels of protein that barely registered in its massive compound eyes. The giant could not have known that within the fragile internal scaffolding of those tiny swimmers lay the genetic potential to eventually build sharks, dinosaurs, whales, and the very humans who would one day dig its fossilized remains from the rock. The apex predator of the Cambrian was utterly blind to the fact that the tiny, insignificant swimmers darting out of its shadow would inherit the entire Earth. Evolution is entirely devoid of sentimentality. It does not respect past achievements, and it does not maintain thrones for aging kings. As the Cambrian period slowly gave way to the Ordovician, the continents continued their slow tectonic drift across the face of the planet. The shallow, warm seas that had cradled the initial explosion of life began to change. Sea levels fluctuated dramatically, driven by the slow formation of massive glaciers on the distant barren landmasses. The temperature of the oceans dropped. The chemistry of the water shifted. The Anomalocaris, an exquisite, highly specialized machine, perfectly calibrated for the specific conditions of the early Cambrian, found itself in a world it no longer recognized. Its massive, unarmored body, once a marvel of hydrodynamic efficiency, became a liability in a colder, more turbulent ocean. The large, stalked eyes that had given it absolute dominion over the sunlit shallows were less effective as the waters deepened and darkened. The giant swimming filter feeders and the increasingly agile, jawless fish began to outcompete the abnormal shrimp for the ocean's dwindling resources. The absolute monarch of the prehistoric deep was slowly, inexorably being pushed toward the margins of existence. There is a profound, almost heartbreaking beauty in this slow fade into extinction. We are conditioned by our modern culture to view extinction exclusively as a failure, a tragic end to a story that should have continued forever. We project our own intense fear of mortality onto the fossil record, viewing the disappearance of a species as a cosmic defeat. But the history of the Earth teaches us a radically different lesson. Extinction is not an anomaly. It is the absolute, unyielding rule of life on this planet. Over 99% of all species that have ever existed are completely gone. To exist at all is a temporary, highly contingent state of being. The Anomalocaris did not fail. It succeeded spectacularly. It dominated the most critical period of biological innovation in planetary history. It reigned for tens of millions of years, a span of time so unimaginably vast that the entire history of human civilization could fit inside it thousands of times over. It lived exactly as it was meant to live, fulfilling its ecological purpose with brutal, mechanical perfection. And then, when the world changed, it gracefully exited the stage to make room for the next grand experiment. This realization carries a deeply comforting weight. We spend so much of our waking lives desperately trying to hold on to things: our youth, our status, our relationships, our very identities. We build walls, both physical and psychological, to protect ourselves from the inevitable shifting of the tides. We exhaust ourselves fighting against the current of time, terrified of losing control, terrified of fading away. But the anomalocaris reminds us that control is an illusion and permanence is a myth. The most powerful creature on the face of the earth, a being that literally invented the concept of dominance, could not stop the continents from drifting or the ocean from cooling. It could not arrest the relentless forward momentum of the universe. And if the undisputed master of the Cambrian Sea could not hold back the tide of time, then we can grant ourselves the permission to stop trying so desperately to control our own fleeting lives. We can surrender to the beautiful, terrifying impermanence of it all. We can let go. Imagine the final days of the great predators. The water is colder now. The bright, warm shallows of their golden age are gone, replaced by deeper, darker currents. A solitary giant drifts slowly over the sediment, its once terrifying lateral flaps moving with a tired, rhythmic slowness. The compound eyes, holding thousands of lenses that once struck terror into the hearts of the armored prey, search the dim water for food that is no longer there. It does not feel despair. It does not mourn the loss of its empire. Its primitive, efficient nervous system simply registers the cold and the exhaustion. Slowly, with the quiet dignity of a creature returning to the elements from which it was forged, it stops swimming. The magnificent body begins to sink, drifting silently down through the water column, turning gently in the deep ocean currents. It settles softly onto the fine, dark mud of the seafloor. The sediment rises around it like a dark, welcoming cloud, slowly covering the spiked appendages, the circular mouth, the massive eyes. The earth is taking its masterpiece back. Over millions of years, the mud will turn to stone, locking the creature in a perfect, silent embrace, preserving its terrifying beauty for 500 million years, until the soft strike of a geologist's hammer brings it back into the light. As you lie there, let yourself sink into the comforting darkness, just as the ancient giant sank into the deep, quiet mud. Feel the weight of your body pressing against the mattress, surrendering to the pull of gravity. The struggles of your day, the anxieties of your week, the complicated armor you wear to protect yourself in the modern world, none of it matters in the face of this vast geological silence. You are completely safe here, held in the quiet embrace of deep time. The world has changed 1,000,000 times before you arrived, and it will change 1,000,000 times after you are gone. You do not need to hold it together. You do not need to fight the current. You can simply close your eyes, let go of the need to control, and allow the quiet, ancient rhythm of the earth to carry you gently into the peaceful, dreamless depths of sleep. Let the dark stone hold you. Let the ancient sea wash over your tired mind. Surrender to the beautiful, temporary nature of your existence and rest. The fossil record, as it is written in the cold and unforgiving stones of the earth, tells us a story of inevitable biological succession. It tells us that the great anomalous shrimp, the undisputed master of the Cambrian period, simply could not keep pace with a changing planet. As the eons dragged on and the Earth slowly transitioned into the Ordovician period, the warm, shallow seas that had cradled this magnificent predator began to cool and deepen dramatically. The continents, still massive and lifeless slabs of barren rock, continued their agonizingly slow tectonic drift, rearranging the global ocean currents and fundamentally altering the chemistry of the water. In the history we know to be true, this was the beginning of the end for the first true leviathans. They were highly specialized machines, exquisitely calibrated for a specific warm water environment that was now evaporating into the geological past. As the waters grew colder, their metabolic engines faltered. As new, highly agile competitors like the early shelled cephalopods and the primitive armored fish began to crowd the pelagic zones, the giant radiodonts found themselves outmaneuvered and outclassed. The story etched in the stone dictates that they quietly slipped into the margins of the ancient oceans, shrinking in size and number until they vanished entirely from the tapestry of life, leaving only their fragmented shadows pressed into the dark shale. Before we step off the established path of history to explore a profoundly different reality, I want to take a gentle pause in our journey. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and it is an absolute privilege to sift through these ancient forgotten sands with you. I have noticed that 71.9% of the minds who wander through these deep corridors of time with us have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find peace in these explorations, if you feel a sense of calm contemplating the immense scale of the cosmos in the deep past, please consider subscribing. It helps immensely, ensuring that we can continue to unearth these magnificent mysteries and dream these ancient dreams together. Now, take a deep, slow breath. Let the modern world fade away completely, and let us imagine a world that almost was. What if the story written in the stone is not the only story that could have been told? Extinction, as we have discussed, is driven by the brutal mathematics of adaptation and environment, but it is also governed by an almost incomprehensible degree of blind chance and pure contingency. A difference of a few degrees in ocean temperature, a slight variation in the oxygen content of a specific marine basin, or a single random genetic mutation spreading through an isolated population can completely rewrite the biological destiny of an entire planet. Let us construct an alternative reality where the great predators did not fade away into the darkness of prehistory. Let us imagine a timeline where a small, geographically isolated population of Anomalocaris, perhaps trapped in a warm, geothermally heated inland sea near the ancient equator, found a profound biological loophole to survive the crushing climatic shifts of the Ordovician period. In this secluded, sunlit sanctuary, shielded from the immediate ecological pressures of the changing global ocean, they were given the one resource that evolution absolutely requires to perform its miracles: time. They had millions of years of uninterrupted time to refine their magnificent biomechanics, to rewrite their genetic code, and to prepare for a triumphant return to a world that thought it had left them far behind. In this alternative history, the descendants of the anomalous shrimp do not simply survive, they adapt with a terrifying mechanical ingenuity. As the global oceans outside their sanctuary continue to cool, natural selection heavily favors those individuals within our isolated population that possess a slightly thicker layer of insulating tissue, or a metabolic rate capable of generating a small amount of internal heat. Over millions of generations, these subtle microscopic advantages compound and magnify. The predator transforms from a creature entirely dependent on the ambient temperature of the surrounding water into something approaching regional endothermy, capable of maintaining a stable, elevated internal temperature in its core and massive brain. This single, highly contingent evolutionary leap changes the fundamental rules of the game. When geological forces eventually fracture the walls of their isolated sea, reconnecting it to the vast global ocean, the descendants of the anomalous shrimp spill out into the wider world. They emerge not as fragile, outdated relics of a bygone era, but as revitalized giants, thermally independent and ready to reclaim their ancestral throne with a vengeance. The oceans they encounter in these alternative Silurian and Devonian periods are drastically different from the tranquil Cambrian waters they once ruled. These waters are now filled with formidable, heavily armored creatures that have evolved in their absence. There are massive predatory sea scorpions known as eurypterids, some reaching lengths of 2.5 meters, armed with devastating, crushing pincers. There are the terrifying placoderms, heavily armored fish with heads and torsos entirely encased in solid bone, possessing jaws that function like hydraulic shears. In our established timeline, these armored fish, like the monstrous Dunkleosteus, became the undisputed apex predators of the Devonian seas, biting through the armor of their prey with unimaginable force. But in our speculative timeline, the Dunkleosteus does not inherit an empty waiting throne. It must compete directly with a highly evolved, massively upscaled descendant of the original Cambrian terror. Let us visualize this alternative Leviathan drifting through the Devonian Sea. It has grown exponentially, fueled by the abundance of new prey, reaching staggering lengths of 6 to 8 meters, rivaling the largest great white sharks of the modern era. Its lateral flaps have fused and evolved into powerful, highly muscular fins, capable of propelling its massive bulk through the water with terrifying speed and sudden, violent agility. Its exoskeleton is no longer soft and pliant. The relentless pressure of competing with jawed fish has forced it to evolve a heavily calcified shell, forming rigid, overlapping plates of biological armor that can easily deflect the crushing bite of the placoderms. The evolutionary arms race in this alternative Devonian period reaches levels of biomechanical extremity that our actual timeline never witnessed. The confrontation between the advanced warm-blooded radiodonts and the armored placoderms pushes both lineages to the absolute limits of physical engineering. The descendants of Anomalocaris dramatically refine their terrifying circular mouths. Instead of 32 simple plates, the aperture evolves into a complex multi-layered crushing mechanism, driven by enormous hydraulic pressure generated by dense musculature anchored to their new, calcified internal structure. When this creature strikes a heavily armored placoderm, the impact resonates through the water column like an underwater explosion, shattering bone and shell alike. The spiked, grasping appendages, the iconic hallmark of their ancient Cambrian ancestors, have transformed into massive serrated scythes, capable of gripping, locking onto, and piercing the smooth, bony plates of their struggling prey. The oceans become a magnificent battleground of titans, a theater of war where vertebrate bone and invertebrate chitin clash in a perpetual, beautifully violent struggle for absolute supremacy. But what of our own ancestors in this alternative, highly competitive ocean? What becomes of the tiny, fragile chordates, those wriggling creatures with the primitive spinal cords that were just beginning to experiment with true jaws and complex brains? In our established history, the rapid decline of the Cambrian apex predators opened a vital ecological window, a brief, miraculous moment of evolutionary breathing room that allowed the early vertebrates to diversify, grow larger, and eventually dominate the planet. But in a world where the Anomalocaris lineage never surrenders its crown, That window never opens. The immense ecological pressure exerted by a thriving, highly adaptable dynasty of giant armored radiodonts creates an impenetrable biological ceiling for the early fish. They are kept small, marginalized, and relegated to the absolute fringes of the ecosystem. To survive, they are forced to hide in the muddy estuaries, the shallow, oxygen-poor coastal swamps, and the dark, abyssal depths where the giant visual predators cannot follow. This speculative scenario forces us to confront the profound and deeply unsettling fragility of our own existence. We exist right now, sitting here, breathing the air of the 21st century, contemplating the deep past and listening to these words, entirely because of the failures and extinctions of other creatures. Our intelligence, our vast civilizations, our very capacity to imagine an alternative world is built squarely upon a foundation of ancient graveyards. If the anomalous shrimp had been just a little more adaptable, if the genetic dice had rolled slightly differently in a single isolated Ordovician sea, the entire vertebrate lineage might never have escaped the bottom rungs of the prehistoric food chain. The Earth might have belonged to the arthropods in their bizarre, segmented relatives for hundreds of millions of years. The grand, sprawling march of evolution might never have produced a creature capable of walking on dry land with a backbone, let alone a creature capable of looking up at the night sky and wondering where it came from. We are not the inevitable conclusion of life on Earth. We are the highly improbable survivors of a planetary lottery, a cosmic accident born from the ashes of magnificent forgotten empires that failed to survive the changing of the climate. To deeply understand and internalize this truth is not to feel diminished, but to feel an overwhelming sense of liberation and absolute peace. You do not need to carry the agonizing weight of being the universe's ultimate purpose. You are a fleeting, beautiful improbability, a temporary arrangement of atoms gifted with the rare ability to witness the majesty of existence. As you lie resting, allow your mind to drift back into the warm, dark waters of that alternative Devonian sea. Imagine floating weightless in the abyss, completely untethered from the demands of human society. Above you, the massive armored shadow of the evolved Anomalocaris glides silently against the faint starlight filtering down through the ancient water. It is a creature of absolute perfection, a master of a world that was simply never meant for us. There is no anxiety in this observation, only a deep, abiding awe for the endless creativity of the cosmos. The universe is constantly experimenting with forms and possibilities, completely indifferent to our judgments. Whether it produces a human being quietly listening to a story or an 8-meter-long armored shrimp hunting in a prehistoric ocean, it is all the exact same magnificent process of matter expressing itself in time. Let that profound thought wash over you like a gentle rhythmic tide. Let the immense, unfathomable scale of these alternative histories carry away the tiny, insignificant worries of your day. You are safe in the knowledge that you are a miracle of sheer chance, resting calmly in a universe far too vast, complex, and beautiful to ever truly be controlled. Drift into that ancient, quiet current, surrender your need for significance, and simply exist. The geological clock ticks forward with the agonizing, beautiful slowness that only a planet can truly comprehend. As we drift further into the speculative timeline, where the great anomalous shrimp never surrendered its crown, we watch the map of the world buckle, fracture, and fold. The isolated landmasses of the early Paleozoic era are being driven together by the relentless churning heat of the Earth's mantle, slowly assembling the colossal supercontinent of Pangaea. It is now roughly 350 million years ago, the absolute dawn of the Carboniferous period. The barren rocks of the continents have finally been conquered by life, blanketed by vast sprawling forests of giant club mosses, towering ferns, and primitive scale-bark trees. These endless swampy jungles are pumping unfathomable quantities of oxygen into the atmosphere, pushing the atmospheric oxygen concentration to a staggering 35%, a level never seen before or since in the entire history of the globe. The air is thick, heavy, and electric with biological potential. In our actual, established history, this hyper-oxygenated world provided the perfect incubator for the first tetrapods, our distant four-legged ancestors, to tentatively crawl out of the shallow water and claim the muddy land. It was also the era when insects, freed from the strict respiratory constraints of a lower oxygen environment, grew to nightmarish proportions. But in our alternative reality, the shoreline is not an empty, waiting frontier. It is a heavily guarded border, patrolled by the terrifying descendants of the very first Leviathan. Before we wade into the dark, tangled roots of this alternative carboniferous swamp to witness the brutal denial of our terrestrial destiny, I must gently break the profound silence of the ancient forest. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and it is my profound honor to walk these forgotten, shadowy shores with you. I have observed that 71.9% of the fellow time travelers who listen to these quiet explorations have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find your mind relaxing as we rewrite the history of the world, if you feel the immediate anxieties of the modern day fading into the mists of deep time, please consider subscribing. Your support is the gentle current that keeps this journey moving forward, allowing us to endlessly unearth the magnificent mysteries of what was and what could have been. Now, take a long, slow breath of that thick, oxygen-rich prehistoric air, and let us sink deeply into the flooded forests of an Earth that belongs entirely to the armored giants. The boundary between water and land is not a sharp, definitive line, but a vast transitional zone of flooded estuaries, brackish lagoons, and expansive muddy deltas. In our alternative timeline, the giant, heavily armored radiodonts of the Devonian period have not ignored this new ecological theater. The intense evolutionary competition in the deep ocean, the constant violent clashes with the massive placoderms, has pushed some lineages of these magnificent predators into the shallower, more structurally complex environments of the coastal swamps. The staggering levels of atmospheric oxygen provide a unique, highly contingent biological loophole for massive arthropods. In our reality, giant dragonflies with wingspans of nearly 1 meter buzz through these forests, and colossal millipedes reaching 2.5 meters in length scavenged on the forest floor, their massive size permitted only by the oxygen-rich air permeating their simple respiratory tubes. In the alternative reality, the descendants of the anomalocaris exploit this exact same atmospheric anomaly, but on a terrifyingly massive scale. Over millions of years of lurking in the shallow, oxygen-saturated water, their gills begin to modify. They evolve complex, highly folded internal structures resembling primitive book lungs, capable of extracting oxygen directly from the heavy, humid air. The apex predator of the ocean is no longer confined to the water. It is slowly, deliberately pulling itself onto the muddy banks. Imagine a creature perfectly adapted to this transitional nightmare. It has retained the streamlined hydrodynamic elegance of its Cambrian ancestors, but its body has grown to the size of a modern saltwater crocodile, stretching 4 to 5 meters in length. Its exoskeleton, heavily calcified during the brutal Devonian arms race, has evolved a mottled bark-like texture, perfectly camouflaging its massive bulk against the fallen trunks of the giant ferns and the dark, decaying vegetation. Its lateral flaps have thickened into highly muscular paddle-like limbs, allowing it to drag its heavy armored body across the slick mud with surprising, terrifying speed. The two grasping appendages at the front of its head are no longer just for sweeping through open water. They've become incredibly robust, articulated striking weapons, capable of launching forward with the explosive tension of a loaded spring to impale prey traversing the shoreline. And its eyes, those magnificent, stalked compound eyes holding tens of thousands of individual lenses, can now see perfectly through both water and air, functioning as dual medium periscopes that scan the dense undergrowth for the slightest twitch of movement. The profound tragedy of this magnificent biological adaptation is what it specifically means for our own distant ancestors. In the established history of the Earth, creatures like Tiktaalik and Ichthyostega, the brave lobe-finned fish that dragged themselves out of the Devonian seas using modified fins, found relative safety in the coastal swamps. The land was devoid of large vertebrate predators, offering a critical, quiet sanctuary where they could slowly, clumsily refine the architecture of the internal skeleton, paving the way for reptiles, mammals, and eventually human beings. But in this alternative carboniferous period, the coastal swamps are absolutely not a sanctuary. They are an absolute slaughterhouse. When the primitive fleshy tetrapods attempt to drag themselves onto the mud, seeking refuge from the crowded, highly competitive waters, they are met by the ultimate ambush predator. An armored giant, perfectly camouflaged in the rotting vegetation, lunges from the dark shadows. The circular, multi-layered crushing mouth originally evolved to shatter the impenetrable shells of placoderms, easily pulverizes the fragile developing bones of the early amphibians. The beachhead is lost. The invasion of the land by the vertebrates is violently and permanently repelled. The evolutionary implications of this single ecological blockade are almost too vast to fully comprehend. By dominating the critical transitional zone between the ocean and the continents, the amphibious radiodonts create an impenetrable biological wall that completely halts the upward mobility of our ancestors. The vertebrates are forced back into the deep water, forever relegated to the role of oceanic second-class citizens. Because they cannot cross the shoreline, they will never evolve dry, scaly skin to conquer the expanding deserts of the Permian period. They will never develop warm-blooded metabolisms to survive the brutal ice ages. They will never evolve the delicate, articulated fingers needed to grasp a tool or the complex, exponentially expanded cerebral cortex required to map the stars and split the atom. The entire sprawling saga of terrestrial vertebrate life, the thunderous reign of the dinosaurs, the quiet rise of the mammals, the building of towering human civilizations, is erased before it even has the chance to truly begin, all because a giant armored shrimp learned how to breathe the humid air of a carboniferous swamp. This scenario radically deconstructs the profound arrogance of our anthropocentric worldview. We look back at the history of evolution and subconsciously view the emergence of intelligent terrestrial life as an absolute inevitability, a preordained destiny that the Earth was always striving to fulfill. We believe that the land was meant to be walked upon by creatures with internal spines, that the air was meant to be breathed by expanding lungs, and that the universe was waiting patiently for a mind complex enough to understand it. But the flooded forests of our alternative reality tell a much colder, much more liberating truth. The universe has absolutely no preference for bone over chitin or for mammals over arthropods. The massive, towering club mosses of the carboniferous period do not care what kind of creature crawls across their submerged, tangled roots. The earth is merely a rocky stage, and the actors who perform upon it are chosen by the blind, indifferent, and utterly chaotic forces of environmental pressure and pure genetic luck. If the anomalocaris lineage had secured the shorelines, the planet would have continued its long, slow dance around the sun without missing a single beat. The forests would have grown and collapsed into coal, the continents would have drifted and collided, and the global climate would have shifted from hothouse to icehouse, all in the complete and total absence of a single human thought. The history of the Earth would have been written entirely in the silent language of chemical signals, vibrational frequencies, and the sudden, violent crunch of exoskeletons in the dark. It would have been a world completely devoid of art, devoid of philosophy, and devoid of the anxious, relentless questioning that defines the modern human condition. But it would absolutely not have been an empty world, nor would it have been a tragedy. It would have been a masterpiece of alternative biological engineering, a planet operating with the exact same mechanical perfection and brutal beauty as the one we currently inhabit. There is a profound, almost overwhelming sense of relief in accepting our own absolute lack of cosmic necessity. We spend so much of our vital energy trying to justify our existence, trying to prove that our specific struggles mean something to the universe, trying to convince ourselves that we are the meaningful culmination of all this deep time. We build massive monuments, write endless histories, and stare into the void demanding answers. But when you strip away the comforting illusion of destiny, you are left with something far more beautiful and far less demanding. The sheer, improbable miracle of your own temporary presence. You do not need to be the ultimate goal of evolution to appreciate the magnificent complexity of the journey. You are a highly unlikely spark of consciousness, a rare and fleeting consequence of a million ancient extinctions and missed connections. And because you are not necessary, you are entirely free. You are free from the crushing cosmic burden of purpose. You are free to simply sit in the quiet darkness, close your eyes, and marvel at the impossible mechanics of the universe without needing to control them. Let your mind slowly drift away from the frantic, demanding pace of your human life and settle gently onto the soft, dark mud of the ancient swamp. Feel the heavy, oxygen-rich air pressing comfortably against your skin. The giant ferns cast long, intricate shadows in the pale light of a moon that still looms large and incredibly close in the prehistoric sky. The water is entirely still, dark as polished obsidian, reflecting the silent, uncaring stars. Resting perfectly motionless on the muddy bank is the amphibious giant, its armored body blending seamlessly with the ancient earth. Its massive, compound eyes are dark, its breathing slow and steady, its perfectly evolved machinery in a state of quiet repose. It does not know that it has altered the destiny of a planet. It does not know that it has erased humanity from the timeline. It simply rests, waiting for the turning of the tide, existing in absolute harmony with the indifferent world around it. Allow yourself to slip into that same profound state of non-resistance. Let go of the need for the human story to be the only story. Let the vast, silent weight of these unlived millions of years press the tension from your muscles. You are resting on the edge of a world that never was, suspended safely in the space between reality and imagination. Surrender your thoughts to the quiet rhythm of the ancient flooded forest. Breathe in the deep, slow time of the earth and let the peaceful, dreamless sleep of the carboniferous night wash over you completely. The relentless grinding machinery of plate tectonics knows absolutely no rest, operating on a scale of time and pressure that entirely defies human comprehension. As we leave the heavy, hyper-oxygenated swamps of the carboniferous behind, we are thrust forward into a profoundly different, terrifyingly harsh reality. We have arrived in the Permian period, roughly 290 million years ago. The slow, agonizing collision of the isolated landmasses has finally reached its geographical climax, forging the single monolithic supercontinent known as Pangaea. This colossal concentration of land fundamentally breaks the global weather systems. The moisture-laden winds sweeping off the single global ocean can no longer penetrate the deep continental interior. Without the regulating influence of the seas, the lush flooded forests wither and collapse, turning into vast oceans of dry dust. The world dries out with brutal, terrifying efficiency. The swamps are replaced by sweeping, endless deserts of blowing red sand, towering dunes, and vast baked salt flats where daytime temperatures soar to lethal extremes. It is a world characterized by absolute desiccation, a thermodynamic crucible that will test the ultimate limits of biological endurance. Before we venture deeper into the blistering heat of this desolate supercontinent, I must pause to welcome you once more to the quiet edges of deep time. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and it is a profound privilege to guide you through these magnificent forgotten realities. I have noticed that exactly 71.9% of the people who wander through these deep historical meditations have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find peace in the contemplation of these vast geological ages, and if you feel your daily anxieties dissolving in the face of deep time, please consider subscribing because it helps immensely. It allows our community of temporal explorers to grow and ensures we can continue unearthing these profound mysteries together. Now, let the modern world evaporate like water on the Permian sand, and let us focus on the shadows moving across the dunes. In the established history of our actual planet, this catastrophic drying of the world was the ultimate crucible that birthed the amniotes. Our distant reptilian ancestors survived the expanding deserts because they invented the amniotic egg, a watertight life support system that allowed them to reproduce entirely severed from the water. They slowly conquered the arid interior, laying the genetic groundwork for the dinosaurs, the birds, and eventually the mammals that would one day inherit the globe. But in our alternative timeline, the shores of the carboniferous swamps were guarded by the amphibious descendants of Anomalocaris, preventing the early vertebrates from ever securing a foothold on dry land. The vertebrates remain trapped in the dying coastal lagoons, while the vast deserts of Pangaea present an empty ecological vacuum. Evolution abhors a vacuum just as intensely as it abhors stagnation. The giant radiodonts, having already conquered the oxygen-rich swamps, must now confront the absolute absence of water. To survive the brutal desiccation of Pangaea, the descendants of the first Leviathan undergo a biomechanical transformation so profound it borders on the miraculous. The sprawling, crocodile-like bodies that allowed them to navigate shallow mud are far too inefficient for shifting, scorching sands. Over millions of years of relentless environmental pressure, their bodies become lighter, leaner, and elevated. They lift their massive armored abdomens high above the baking surface, supported by highly articulated stilt-like limbs, ending in wide pads that distribute weight perfectly across the loose sand. The mottled, bark-like texture of their exoskeleton smooths out, evolving a highly polished, waxy cuticle that functions as an absolute moisture barrier, reflecting ultraviolet radiation and sealing internal fluids against the dry heat. Their respiratory systems become highly convoluted and deeply internalized, minimizing water loss with every exhalation. The most magnificent innovation is their solution to reproduction. Denied watery nurseries, they bypass the need for external eggs entirely. They evolve specialized internal brood chambers, safely insulated within their temperature-regulated bodies. The young develop inside the parent until they are structurally sound enough to be born alive directly onto the scorching dunes, fully armored and ready to hunt. And hunt they must, for the Permian Desert supports a bizarre ecosystem of giant, drought-resistant terrestrial arthropods and heavily shielded herbivores of their own lineage that feed on tough early gymnosperms. The apex predator of the Cambrian Sea has transited across millions of years to become the undisputed, long-legged terror of the deep desert. Imagine this creature, 5 meters long, elevated on rigid pillars, striding across a massive red dune. Its stalked compound eyes have evolved specialized polarizing filters to cut through the intense glare, scanning the horizon with mechanical precision. There is a staggering resilience in the mechanics of life. We are conditioned by our fragile mammalian biology to view the desert as a wasteland devoid of comfort. We measure the value of an environment by how easily it sustains our specific physiology. But the universe simply provides energy and matter, and life endlessly reorganizes itself to exploit those resources, no matter how extreme. The towering sand dunes of Pangaea are not a tragedy. They are just another physical state of the earth, as natural and valid as the deepest ocean. The giant armored radiodont striding across the salt flats does not curse the heat, nor does it long for the damp shaded safety of the vanished coastal swamps. It does not feel alienated by the harshness of its reality. It is perfectly in tune with the desert because it was forged by the desert. Its entire existence is a seamless integration with the environment, a perfect, uncomplaining expression of the present moment. When we deeply internalize this reality, the heavy burden of our constant dissatisfaction begins to lift. We spend our lives perpetually fighting against our environments, resisting the natural aging of our bodies, and desperately trying to engineer a state of permanent comfort that cannot exist in a dynamic universe. We suffer because we demand that the world conform to our delicate preferences. But if we can look at the scorching deserts of the Permian period and see a theater of magnificent biological triumph, we can change our relationship with our own difficulties. We can stop viewing struggles as unnatural interruptions and start seeing them as the friction that shapes our character. Harshness is not a punishment, it is the prerequisite for adaptation. To reject harshness is to reject the fundamental mechanism of existence. You can find profound peace in simply accepting the conditions of your reality. You can learn to be like the armored giant of the dunes, walking with quiet dignity through whatever landscape deep time presents. As the incredibly long day of the Permian period finally comes to an end, the younger sun dips below the jagged horizon of the supercontinent. The transition to night in the deep desert is brutally extreme. The intense heat radiates rapidly away into the thin atmosphere, and a profound, biting cold settles over the endless dunes. The sky transforms into an uninterrupted canopy of stars, blazing with fierce clarity. The giant predator seeks out the sheltering lee of a towering rock formation. It lowers its massive body, folding its articulated limbs beneath its armored chassis. The smooth, waxy plates of its exoskeleton clicks softly as it settles into the cooling sand. Its compound eyes darken, its respiratory spiracles constrict to conserve moisture, and its metabolism drops into a state of deep, cold-induced torpor. It rests in absolute silence, a perfect machine powered down beneath the ancient stars. Allow your own body to emulate that heavy stillness. Let the residual heat of your anxieties radiate away into the quiet darkness of your room. Feel your limbs growing heavy, supported by the bed just as the ancient sand supports the giant. There is nowhere else you need to be. The vast, indifferent universe is managing the turning of the planets, the slow burning of the distant suns, and the agonizingly slow drifting of the continental plates. You are relieved of all responsibility. Surrender to the absolute, crushing silence of the Permian night. Let deep time wash over your conscious mind, carrying you down into the dark, peaceful, and perfectly still depths of dreamless sleep. The Permian period, with its endless scorching deserts and towering dunes, did not fade away with a gentle transition into the next geological epoch. It was violently, mercilessly executed. 252 million years ago, the Earth experienced the most catastrophic biological crisis in its entire, sprawling 4.5 billion year history. Deep beneath the surface of the supercontinent of Pangaea, in a region we now call Siberia, the very mantle of the planet tore open. This was not a single volcanic eruption, but a relentless continental-scale flood of magma that poured across the land for hundreds of thousands of years. The Siberian traps pumped unfathomable gigatons of carbon dioxide and toxic sulfur into the atmosphere. The global temperature skyrocketed. The oceans acidified, turning into stagnant anoxic dead zones. Acid rain scoured the barren rocks, and the protective ozone layer completely collapsed, bathing the dying world in lethal ultraviolet radiation. In the history we know, this apocalypse, known as the Great Dying, wiped out roughly 96% of all marine species and over 70% of all terrestrial vertebrate life. It was the closest our planet has ever come to being completely sterilized, a terrifying reset button pressed by the blind mechanics of geology. Before we witness how the armored monarchs of the desert navigated this literal hellscape, I want to take a gentle pause in the darkness. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and it is a profound honor to guide you through these magnificent forgotten realities. I've noticed that exactly 71.9% of the people who wander through these deep historical meditations have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find peace in the contemplation of these vast geological ages, and if you feel your daily anxieties dissolving in the face of deep time, please consider subscribing. It helps immensely, allowing our community of temporal explorers to grow and ensuring we can continue unearthing these profound mysteries together. Now, take a deep cleansing breath, let the modern world evaporate, and let us focus on the ash-choked skies of the apocalyptic transition. In our established timeline, the Great Dying absolutely decimated the dominant land animals of the era, the synapsids, which were the distant precursors to modern mammals. Their devastating collapse left an immense ecological void, which was eventually filled by the surviving reptiles, paving the way for the astonishing 200 million year reign of the dinosaurs. But in our speculative timeline, the synapsids never even existed, having been prevented from ever leaving the ocean by the amphibious descendants of the anomalous shrimp. Instead, the global apocalypse falls squarely upon the heavily calcified shoulders of the giant desert-adapted radiodonts. To survive the extreme heat, the toxic air, and the absolute collapse of the food chain, they cannot rely on their size or their armor. They must rely on their ancient fundamental capacity to power down. Just as their distant marine ancestors survived oxygen-poor waters by slowing their metabolisms, the giants of the Permian dunes begin to dig. Using their massive articulated limbs, they excavate deep spiraling burrows into the baked earth, descending far below the lethal surface temperatures and the toxic storms. Within these dark subterranean sanctuaries, they enter a state of profound physiological suspension known as aestivation. Their heart rates slow to a barely detectable rhythm, their respiratory spiracles close to microscopic slits, and they wait out the apocalypse in a silent, death-like trance that lasts for decades at a time. When the volcanic fury of the Siberian traps finally subsides and the Earth slowly, painfully begins to heal, the dawn of the Triassic period reveals a world wiped entirely clean. The surface is a blank, silent slate, and from the deep, cool burrows, the survivors emerge. The radiodonts that pull themselves out of the ash-covered earth are forever changed by the crucible of the great dying. They are leaner, highly resilient, and uniquely poised to conquer a world entirely devoid of competition. The Triassic period becomes the stage for a spectacular, unparalleled adaptive radiation. Without any other large animals to contest their absolute dominance, they diversify into a dizzying array of nightmarish and magnificent forms. Because the sprawling crocodile-like posture is terribly inefficient for sustained travel across the vast empty plains of recovering Pangaea, a new biomechanical revolution takes place. Over millions of years, certain lineages of these armored invertebrates begin to shift their center of gravity backward. Their front limbs, the ancient grasping appendages that once swept the Cambrian seas, become smaller and more specialized for grasping and manipulating objects. Their hind limbs grow massive, highly muscular, and elongated. They rise off the ground, balancing their heavily plated bodies on two powerful back legs, using a stiffened, segmented tail as a dynamic counterweight. They become fully bipedal. Imagine a creature resembling the iconic theropod dinosaurs, like a velociraptor or a tyrannosaurus, but constructed entirely of articulated chitin and possessing the horrifying, multi-layered, circular crushing maw of its ancestors. These bipedal radiodonts, capable of running at terrifying speeds across the open Triassic scrublands, become the new apex predators of the Mesozoic era. They hunt in highly coordinated packs, communicating through complex rhythmic clicks and stridulations produced by rubbing specialized plates of their exoskeletons together, a sound that resonates across the silent plains like the aggressive ticking of giant biological clocks. The herbivores of this era, also descended from the burrowing survivors, evolved to match this newly elevated threat. They become towering, heavily armored titans, browsing on the primitive conifers and cycads that slowly recolonize the continent. Some evolve massive bony frills and defensive spikes, not unlike the ceratopsians of our timeline, but built from the ancient calcified shell architecture of the sea. The entire dinosaurian dynamic of predator and prey is flawlessly recreated, but the actors wearing the costumes are fundamentally alien. They do not possess a single bone in their bodies. They do not pump red iron-based blood, but rather a cool copper-based hemolymph. They are the absolute pinnacle of invertebrate evolution, achieving a scale and a complexity that our world reserved exclusively for the vertebrates. To observe this alternative Triassic world is to confront a profound philosophical truth about the nature of disaster and renewal. We are biologically hardwired to view mass extinction events with a sense of existential terror. We see the ash, the acid, and the dying, and we interpret it as an ultimate failure of the biosphere. But evolution does not share our emotional aversion to destruction. To the blind mechanics of the universe, a mass extinction is simply a clearing of the board, an aggressive pruning of the evolutionary tree that creates the necessary space for entirely new branches to flourish. Without the catastrophic violence of the Great Dying, the magnificent bipedal radiodonts of our alternative timeline would never have evolved. They required the destruction of the old world to inherit the new one. The disaster was not an end. It was a brutal, necessary beginning. This realization forces us to gently dismantle our deeply ingrained anthropocentrism. We look at the history of our own planet and secretly celebrate the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs, viewing it as a fortuitous, necessary tragedy that eventually allowed the tiny, insignificant mammals to rise and evolve into us. We frame cosmic disasters around our own eventual emergence. But in a world completely devoid of human destiny, the universe demonstrates its magnificent, chilling indifference. It does not destroy worlds to make way for consciousness. It simply destroys, and it simply creates. The bipedal giants hunting across the Triassic plains are not a mistake, just as we are not a predetermined goal. We are all just temporary expressions of matter, molded by the arbitrary violence and the spontaneous creativity of deep time. Recognizing the absolute indifference of the cosmos is incredibly liberating. It frees us from the exhausting burden of trying to interpret every hardship and every disaster as a personal punishment or a test of our character. Sometimes the world simply burns, and sometimes it heals. You do not need to extract a profound human-centric meaning from the mechanics of existence. You can find profound peace in the simple act of letting go of the narrative. You are not required to hold the universe together, and you are not required to understand why the cosmic dice rolled the way they did. You are only required to experience the fleeting, beautiful moment you have been given. As the Triassic sun sinks below the horizon, casting long purple shadows across the scrubland, the frantic energy of the day begins to subside. The air cools, and the rhythmic clicking of the pack hunters fades into the distance. One of the bipedal giants finds a quiet grove of ancient cycads. It lowers its massive armored body to the ground, folding its powerful hind legs beneath it. The articulated plates of its exoskeleton settle with a soft scraping sound against the dry earth. Its dual medium compound eyes slowly darken, processing the faint light of the stars that emerge in the clear, ash-free sky. The creature's breathing slows, its complex internal book lungs drawing in the cool night air with a gentle, rhythmic hiss. It does not possess a mind capable of worrying about the past apocalypse or anticipating the millions of years of evolution that lie ahead. It is completely, perfectly immersed in the present moment, a biological machine winding down for the night. Allow your own body to mirror that ancient, perfect stillness. Let the heavy weight of your daily anxieties sink into the mattress, just as the ash settled onto the recovering earth. Feel the tension leaving your muscles, replaced by the profound, comforting realization that you are held safely in the endless, uncaring embrace of deep time. The world has ended and begun anew countless times before, and it will continue to do so long after you are asleep. Surrender to that beautiful, eternal cycle. Let your breathing match the slow, steady hiss of the ancient night, and let the vast, silent history of the planet carry you down into the peaceful, dreamless depths of rest. As the deep, relentless wheel of geological time turns, the massive supercontinent of Pangaea begins to fracture. The intense subterranean heat of the Earth's mantle forcefully tears it apart, creating vast shallow interior seas and humid coastlines. We are entering the equivalent of the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, spanning from roughly 200 million to 66 million years ago. The desiccated deserts of the Triassic have been flooded by expanding oceans, transforming the globe into a lush hothouse world. The climate is warm and remarkably stable, blanketed by dense forests of towering conifers and giant ferns. In the history we were taught, this was the golden age of the dinosaurs. But in our speculative timeline, the bipedal, heavily armored descendants of the anomalous shrimp have absolute dominion over these emerald jungles. They have diversified into thousands of hyper-specialized forms, their calcified chitinous plates shimmering in the filtered sunlight, their compound eyes scanning the undergrowth with mathematical precision. Yet, even as they master the earth and the coastal waters, the blind engine of evolution looks toward the final frontier, the open sky. Before we cast our gaze upward into the prehistoric clouds to witness the breathtaking conquest of the air, I must gently interrupt our journey through this emerald paradise. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and it is my absolute privilege to be your guide through these magnificent, forgotten corridors of deep time. I have noticed that exactly 71.9% of the fellow wanderers who listen to these quiet explorations have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find your mind relaxing as we rewrite the history of the world, if you feel the immediate anxieties of the modern day fading into the mists of the ancient past, please consider subscribing because it helps immensely. Your support is the gentle thermal current that keeps this journey soaring, allowing us to endlessly unearth the magnificent mysteries of what was and what could have been. Now, take a long, slow breath of that humid, oxygen-rich prehistoric air. Let the noises of the 21st century fall away entirely, and let us look up at the shadows passing over the canopy. In our established reality, the sky was conquered first by insects, then by the leathery winged pterosaurs, and finally by the feathered descendants of the theropod dinosaurs. But in a world where the vertebrate lineage has been aggressively suppressed, forever trapped in the stagnant mud of the deep estuaries, the architectural path to the sky takes a radically different route. The bipedal radiodonts, those agile terrors of the plains, possess highly articulated limbs and an incredibly lightweight, hollow-tubed respiratory system. Over tens of millions of years, as certain lineages take to the towering trees to hunt or escape predators, a spectacular biomechanical transformation unfolds. The lateral flaps of their ancient Cambrian ancestors, which had fused into terrestrial walking limbs, begin to stretch and flatten once more. The rigid chitin softens and extends between highly elongated jointed digits, forming vast translucent sails of living tissue. They evolve a sophisticated membranous wing structure supported by pressurized hydraulic vanes, capable of adjusting its aerodynamic profile with split-second precision. By the middle of this alternative Cretaceous period, the skies are filled with creatures of terrifying majesty. Imagine a flying leviathan with a wingspan of 8 meters, larger than a small modern aircraft. Its body is encased in smooth aerodynamic plates of interlocking armor, polished by the wind to a metallic sheen. It possesses the iconic stalked compound eyes of its lineage, functioning as biological targeting arrays capable of spotting the minuscule twitch of prey from thousands of meters above the forest floor. Hanging beneath its streamlined head are the ancient grasping appendages transformed into lethal, articulated grappling hooks. When this creature hunts, It folds its massive wings and drops from the sky like a kinetic projectile, snapping its wings open at the last possible fraction of a second to arrest its fall, snatching its prey with absolute finality. The sound of these armored titans breaking the air is not the soft rustle of feathers, but a deep resonant thrumming, the aggressive vibration of chitinous sails slicing through the humid prehistoric atmosphere. Down below, another profound biological revolution is sweeping across the continents. Roughly 130 million years ago, the first angiosperms, the flowering plants, make their explosive debut. Flowers did not evolve to be beautiful for us. They evolved as calculated reproductive bribes, trading nectar for the transportation of genetic material. In our alternative timeline, the giant armored herbivores become the primary engines of this floral revolution. To attract a creature that stands 4 meters tall with tens of thousands of individual lenses, the flowers must be monumental. The forests become adorned with colossal blooms, fleshy cups of vivid iridescent colors reaching 2 meters across. Because the compound eyes of the radiodonts can perceive ultraviolet light invisible to human eyes, these flowers display complex geometric patterns, glowing like neon landing beacons. The heavy herbivores, with their multi-layered crushing maws adapted into delicate siphons, move carefully among these giant blooms. They are unknowing gardeners in an alien paradise, dusted with golden pollen as they feed. This is a world of staggering aesthetic brilliance, completely eclipsing anything in our modern era. Yet, there is not a single mind present capable of writing a poem about it or weeping at its ephemeral beauty. This realization cuts to the very core of our deeply held human-centric philosophies. We are desperately attached to the romantic notion that beauty requires an observer to validate it, that a sunset is only magnificent because a human eye catches the light. But the massive, ultraviolet glowing flowers of this alternative Cretaceous period utterly dismantle that comforting arrogance. They demonstrate, with silent botanical certainty, that the universe is inherently and aggressively creative. It produces masterpieces of biomechanical engineering and breathtaking tapestries of color, simply as the byproduct of survival and reproduction. Beauty is not a gift bestowed upon us by a caring cosmos. It is a fundamental property of matter interacting with energy over deep time. The armored pollinator does not appreciate the aesthetic perfection of the flower. It merely registers the ultraviolet data and responds to the promise of calories. As the long, humid afternoon slowly bleeds into evening, the golden light of the younger sun slants through the dense canopy. The massive ultraviolet blooms begin to fold their thick petals inward, protecting their reproductive structures from the cooling night air. High above, one of the great flying leviathans catches the last rising thermal of the day. It circles once, its translucent, heavily veined wings catching the dying light, turning the creature into a silhouette of perfect geometry against the darkening sky. It descends gracefully toward the highest branches of a massive conifer, its articulated grappling hooks locking onto the thick wood with a solid click. The creature folds its vast wings tightly against its armored flanks. Its dual medium compound eyes, which have processed millions of data points throughout the frantic day, slowly dim, the thousands of microscopic lenses slipping into the dark repose of the night. It exists entirely in the perfect, quiet safety of the immediate present. Let your own mind emulate the absolute stillness of that roosting giant. Feel the solid, unwavering support beneath you, holding you safely against the pull of gravity, just as the ancient tree holds the sleeping predator. The vibrant, chaotic colors of your waking day are folding inward now, shutting down to protect your vital energy. You do not need to process any more information. You do not need to be a witness to the universe, and you do not need to understand your place within it. The ancient estuaries, the giant flowers, the thrumming membranous wings, they are all gently fading into the dark, silent stone of deep time, leaving behind only the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. Allow the immense, comforting weight of this unrecorded history to press the last remaining tension from your muscles. Surrender entirely to the indifferent darkness. The world will continue its magnificent, unobserved dance without you, allowing you to sink perfectly into the quiet, dreamless embrace of sleep. 66 million years ago, on an ordinary spring morning in what would one day be categorized as the late Cretaceous period, the absolute peak of the armored invertebrate empire was experiencing its golden age. The massive bipedal radiodonts stalked across the humid plains, their polished chitin reflecting the intense sunlight, while the giant flying leviathans cast sweeping shadows over the colossal, ultraviolet glowing flowers. The earth was a symphony of perfectly calibrated biological machinery. But millions of kilometers away, traveling through the cold, absolute silence of space, a rock the size of a towering mountain was hurtling toward the planet at 20 kilometers per second. Its trajectory had been shaped by an almost infinite chaotic chain of gravitational interactions stretching back to the very formation of the solar system. The pull of a gas giant, the slight, almost imperceptible nudge of passing comets, the slow wobble of its own uneven spin, every single variable had perfectly aligned to place this 10-kilometer sphere of carbon and iron on a direct, unavoidable collision course with the shallow seas of what we now call the Yucatan Peninsula. Before we watch the terrifying geometry of the cosmos intersect with the fragile biology of the Earth, I must gently pause our journey through the stars. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and it is my profound honor to navigate these magnificent forgotten timelines with you. I have observed that exactly 71.9% of the fellow wanderers who listen to these quiet explorations have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find your mind relaxing as we rewrite the history of the world, if you feel the immediate anxieties of the modern day fading into the mists of the ancient past, please consider subscribing. Your support is the gentle gravity that keeps this journey in orbit, allowing us to endlessly unearth the magnificent mysteries of what was and what could have been. Now, take a long, slow breath. Let the noises of the 21st century fall away entirely, and let us look up at the burning streak across the prehistoric sky. In the history that we belong to, that massive rock did not miss. It struck the shallow waters with the incomprehensible energy of 100 million nuclear weapons, vaporizing billions of tons of rock, sulfur, and seawater in a geological instant. It launched a suffocating cloud of debris into the stratosphere that completely choked the atmosphere, plunging the planet into a sudden freezing darkness that lasted for years. In our timeline, that cataclysmic impact wiped out 3/4 of all species on Earth, including every single dinosaur larger than a house cat. It was the Great Fiery Reset that ultimately cleared the ecological stage for the tiny, shivering mammals to emerge from their burrows and eventually claim the world. But tonight, we are going to explore the profound, terrifying fragility of that established history. We are going to ask what would have happened if that rock, that falling mountain of iron, had arrived just minutes later. The specific trajectory of any celestial body depends on countless microscopic variables stretching back eons. and a change in any one of them would have produced a profoundly different outcome. In our speculative reality, the asteroid arrives slightly off schedule. It screams through the upper atmosphere, carving a white-hot, blinding trail across the sky that is visible from 1,000 kilometers away, a magnificent, terrifying omen that the giant compound eyes of the bipedal radiodonts watch with complete incomprehension. But it does not strike the shallow, sulfur-rich crust of the continental shelf. It splashes down into the absolute center of the deep Pacific Ocean, thousands of kilometers from the nearest coastline. It generates towering tsunamis that devastate the immediate coastal regions, sweeping away the shoreline forests and drowning millions of creatures. But the devastating planet-killing sulfur remains trapped safely at the bottom of the ocean. The dust thrown into the air settles within months rather than years. The sun does not vanish, and the global temperature does not plummet into a nuclear winter. The great armored giants wake up the next morning to a world that has been violently shaken but absolutely not destroyed. They stretch their powerful articulated limbs, their compound eyes adjusting to the bright unfiltered sunlight. They continue doing exactly what they'd been doing for the previous 150 million years, dominating every single terrestrial and marine ecosystem on the face of the planet. They survive, not because they are inherently superior, and not because they are destined to survive, but because the particular event that would have killed them simply did not occur. The universe flipped a coin, and it landed in their favor. To deeply understand this contingency is to experience a radical shift in how we perceive our own existence. We are so heavily conditioned by our anthropocentric narratives to believe that intelligence, complexity, and human consciousness are the inevitable triumphant results of a universe trying to wake up. We believe that we earned our place at the top of the planetary hierarchy through evolutionary superiority. But the near miss of the asteroid in our alternative timeline exposes this comforting narrative as an absolute illusion. The tiny, fragile chordates, those distant marginalized ancestors of the vertebrates hiding in the deep oceanic trenches, were not waiting patiently for their turn. They were trapped. And without the specific catastrophic intervention of a random rock from space hitting a specific sulfur-rich target, they would have remained trapped forever. Our entire sprawling history, the rise of mammals, the first steps on the African savanna, the building of cities, the writing of symphonies, is entirely contingent upon a cosmic accident. We are the improbable children of a very specific disaster. If the asteroid had missed, the Earth would not have wept for our absence. The planet would have continued its slow, majestic rotation, perfectly content with its armored masters. The descendants of the anomalocaris would have been granted another 66 million years of uninterrupted evolution. As the warm, stable climate of the Mesozoic era slowly began to fade, giving way to the cooling temperatures and expanding grasslands of the Cenozoic, these magnificent invertebrate titans would have been forced to adapt once again. They would have encountered challenges they had never faced in their long, violent history. The sprawling forests would have broken up, replaced by endless open plains where stealth was impossible, and speed became the ultimate currency of survival. Imagine the bipedal, armored radiodonts adapting to these new, endless grasslands. Without the dense cover of the jungle, the heavily plated ambush predators would be forced to lean down, shedding their heaviest armor in exchange for long-distance endurance. Their muscular hind legs would stretch and refine, their massive, crushing maws streamlining to reduce drag. They would become the ultimate pursuit predators of the open plains, running down their heavily shielded grazing prey in highly coordinated strategic packs. In the absence of an asteroid, the Earth would have simply rebuilt its ecological theater with the exact same actors wearing entirely new costumes. The vertebrate lineage would have remained exactly where it had always been, locked out of the spotlight, shivering in the cold, dark margins of a world that belonged entirely to the descendants of the Cambrian Sea. There is an incredibly profound, almost intoxicating peace to be found in this realization of our own cosmic unimportance. When you accept that humanity is not a predetermined necessity, but rather a beautiful, highly improbable accident, the overwhelming pressure to achieve ultimate cosmic significance simply evaporates. You do not need to justify your existence to the universe, because the universe was not expecting you to arrive. You are free to simply be a witness, a temporary pair of eyes looking out at the magnificent, chaotic beauty of a world that could have been completely different. The armored giants of our alternative timeline did not spend their days worrying about the meaning of their lives, nor did they look up at the stars and wonder if they mattered. They simply existed, perfectly attuned to the physical mechanics of their reality, breathing the air, hunting the plains, and sleeping under the turning galaxy. As the long, cool evening begins to settle over the open plains of this alternative world, the relentless heat of the day finally breaks. The golden slanting light of the setting sun catches the polished chitinous armor of a resting herd, turning them into statues of glowing bronze against the tall grass. The predatory packs, having secured their meals, retreat into the rocky outcrops to conserve their energy. The frantic, desperate struggle for survival pauses, yielding to the ancient, undeniable biological demand for rest. The immense, compound eyes of the radiodonts, which have processed millions of photons and tracked the complex geometry of the hunt all day, slowly begin to power down. Their internal systems shift into a quiet, rhythmic stasis. The night sky emerges, blazing with the cold, indifferent light of billions of stars, the exact same stars that shine above your own home. Let the profound, heavy silence of this alternative night wash over you. Feel the tension in your shoulders uncoil, mimicking the relaxed, powerful limbs of the resting giants. The universe does not require you to hold it together. The planets will turn, the continents will drift, and the grand, unwritten possibilities of deep time will continue to unfold, entirely independent of your worries. You are completely safe, suspended in this vast conceptual space between the world that is and the world that almost was. Allow the comforting weight of your own beautiful insignificance to press you deeper into the mattress. Let go of the rigid narratives of destiny and control. Breathe in the cool, quiet air of the ancient night, and let the magnificent, indifferent peace of the cosmos carry you gently downward into the dark, restorative, and absolutely silent depths of sleep. The relentless machinery of the cosmos does not pause to admire its own creations. As the tens of millions of years roll forward from the spectacular near-miss of the asteroid, the Earth slowly begins to alter its temperament. The warm, humid greenhouse conditions that had cradled the armored giants for hundreds of millions of years start to unravel. The continents, driven by the blind, grinding engines of the mantle beneath them, drift into new, fateful configurations. South America tears itself away from Antarctica, opening a deep oceanic gateway that allows a freezing, circumpolar current to isolate the southern continent. The global thermostat is violently turned down. The planet crosses a terrifying threshold, plunging headlong into a long, agonizingly slow slide toward the ice ages. The sprawling tropical forests that once blanketed the globe from pole to pole wither and retreat toward the equator, replaced by endless wind-scoured grasslands and eventually by the creeping silent advance of the glaciers. The Pleistocene epoch has arrived, bringing with it a climate regime of freezing, brutal extremes that the planet has not experienced in over 250 million years. Before we step onto the frozen, blinding expanse of this new, icy reality to witness the ultimate test of the armored invertebrate empire, I must gently pause our descent into the cold. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and it is my profound honor to walk these silent, forgotten glaciers with you. I have observed that exactly 71.9% of the fellow time travelers who listen to these quiet explorations have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find your mind relaxing as we rewrite the history of the world, if you feel the immediate anxieties of the modern day fading into the mists of the ancient past, please consider subscribing. Your support is the gentle hearth fire that keeps this journey warm, allowing us to endlessly unearth the magnificent mysteries of what was and what could have been. Now, draw a deep, slow breath of that crisp, freezing prehistoric air. Pull your awareness away from the Russian demands of the 21st century, and let us look out across the vast white tundra. In our established history, the descent into the Ice Ages was the supreme crucible that forged the iconic mammalian megafauna. It produced the woolly mammoths, the towering cave bears, and the heavily insulated woolly rhinoceroses, creatures perfectly engineered to retain internal heat and survive the lean, freezing darkness of the glacial winters. But in our alternative timeline, those mammalian niches remain entirely empty, locked away behind the impenetrable biological wall erected by the amphibious radiodonts hundreds of millions of years prior. The immense challenge of surviving a world buried beneath kilometers of solid ice falls squarely upon the heavily plated shoulders of the giant bipedal invertebrates. To the limits of human understanding, a creature encased in a chitinous exoskeleton circulating cool copper-based hemolymph should absolutely perish in the freezing, sub-zero temperatures of a Pleistocene blizzard. Arthropods, as we know them in our modern world, are overwhelmingly creatures of warmth, driven into sluggish torpor by the first touch of frost. But evolution is the ultimate uncompromising engineer, and when presented with the absolute binary choice of adaptation or extinction, it consistently produces miracles of biomechanical ingenuity. To survive the encroaching ice, the descendants of the anomalous shrimp leverage a fundamental biological principle known as Bergmann's rule, which dictates that bodies must grow massively larger in cold climates to minimize heat loss through surface area. The bipedal giants of the plains undergo a staggering scale of gigantism. But size alone is not enough to combat the lethal creeping cold. Their polished, waxy exoskeletons, which once brilliantly reflected the scorching ultraviolet radiation of the Permian deserts, undergo a profound anatomical revolution. The microscopic sensory hairs that dot their chitinous plates, known as setae, begin to multiply and elongate wildly. Over millions of generations of brutal natural selection, these simple sensory filaments transform into a dense overlapping coat of thick insulating proto-feathers. They become woolly radiodonts. Imagine a creature standing 5 meters tall, weighing over 8,000 kilograms, its massive armored chassis completely enveloped in a shaggy, pale gray coat of dense filaments that traps a thick layer of insulating air directly against its core. It is a breathtaking fusion of invertebrate architecture and extreme cold weather engineering. Picture this towering woolly behemoth moving slowly across the blinding white expanse of the mammoth steppe. Its massive, highly muscular hind legs, protected by dense layers of chitinous insulation, punch through the deep snowdrifts with mechanical, rhythmic certainty. The sound of its heavy footfalls crunching through the frozen crust of the snow echoes for kilometers across the empty plains. Its front appendages, the ancient articulated grasping limbs that once snatched soft-bodied prey from the Cambrian reefs, have evolved into broad, flattened, spade-like structures. It uses these powerful modified limbs to continuously sweep the heavy snow away, exposing the tough frozen grasses and low shrubs buried beneath the surface. Its circular, multi-layered crushing maw, now hidden beneath a dense thicket of insulating bristles, grinds the frozen vegetation with absolute, merciless efficiency. It does not shiver. It does not suffer. Its complex internal book lungs draw in the freezing, razor-sharp air and warm it deep within its massive elevated core before it can chill its vital fluids. It is a perfectly insulated, self-sustaining biological furnace, walking with slow, majestic dignity across a frozen landscape that would instantly kill a naked human being. But a world of giant woolly herbivores cannot exist without the terrifying shadow of a predator engineered to hunt them. The bipedal pack-hunting radiodonts that dominated the warm Mesozoic plains adapt to the ice with an equal chilling elegance. They do not grow quite as massive as their prey, prioritizing explosive speed and coordinated agility over sheer bulk. Their insulating coat of setae is thinner but brilliantly white, rendering them practically invisible against the blowing snow of a Pleistocene blizzard. Their iconic stalked compound eyes undergo a radical structural adjustment. To prevent the moisture in their tens of thousands of individual lenses from freezing solid in the sub-zero winds, they evolve a continuous biological antifreeze, a clear, viscous secretion that constantly washes over their optic arrays. Furthermore, these lenses evolve specialized polarization filters to completely block the blinding, agonizing glare of the sun reflecting off the endless ice sheets. When a pack of these white, ghostly predators moves through the freezing fog, they are entirely silent, their padded feet making absolutely no sound on the packed snow. They communicate not through sound, but through subtle coordinated shifts in posture and the flashing of specific ultraviolet reflective patches hidden beneath their insulating coats. To look upon this frozen alternative world is to fundamentally dismantle our deepest, most primal human anxieties regarding scarcity and harshness. We are biologically programmed by our fragile, naked primate ancestry to view the cold as an aggressive enemy, an invading force that brings starvation, suffering, and death. We spend our lives building fortresses of concrete, glass, and artificial heat to keep the freezing indifference of the universe at bay. We view a blizzard as a chaotic, terrifying disruption of our comfort. But the towering woolly radiodonts standing calmly in the eye of the storm do not view the ice as an enemy. The ice is exactly what forged them. It is the uncompromising sculptor that carved away their weaknesses and clothed them in magnificent insulating armor. They do not resent the harshness of their environment because they are perfectly, flawlessly integrated with it. The storm is not an interruption of their life. The storm is the very medium of their existence. There is a profound, liberating peace waiting to be discovered in this realization. When we stop furiously resisting the harsh, unpredictable conditions of our own lives, when we cease viewing every difficulty as an unnatural tragedy that has unfairly befallen us, we can begin to find our own hidden adaptations. The universe is not punishing you when it sends the cold. It is simply changing the season. You do not need to fight the turning of the planet, and you do not need to endlessly exhaust yourself trying to melt the glaciers of your own circumstances. You can simply adapt. You can grow your own insulation, find your own quiet resilience, and learn to walk with slow, majestic dignity through the storms. As the long, brutal Pleistocene day fades into a freezing, star-swept night, the howling blizzard finally begins to settle. The aggressive wind drops to a soft, rhythmic whisper across the sweeping dunes of snow. The giant woolly herbivores gather together in a sheltered, rocky valley, pressing their massive insulated bodies close to one another to share their immense internal heat. Their compound eyes dim, the biological antifreeze coating their lenses, catching the faint cold light of the ancient stars. They lower their heavy armored heads, their breathing slowing to a deep resonant rumble that vibrates gently through the frozen earth beneath them. They do not possess a mind capable of anticipating the millions of years of glaciation that lie ahead. They are completely immersed in the profound silence of the present moment, winding down for the night, secure in a world of ice. Allow your own body to emulate that heavy, protected stillness. Feel the warm, insulating blankets wrapped tightly around you, keeping the cold, indifferent demands of the modern world safely at bay. You are completely secure, suspended in the quiet, peaceful eye of deep time. Let your breathing match the slow, resonant rumble of the sleeping giants resting in the prehistoric snow. You do not need to carry the weight of the past or fear the freezing winds of the future. Surrender to the absolute, pristine silence of the frozen night and let the magnificent ancient ice carry you softly downward into the dark, restorative, perfect depths of dreamless sleep. As the massive continent-spanning glaciers of the Pleistocene epoch finally begin their slow, agonizing retreat, the global climate softens once again. The brutal, freezing extremes of the Ice Age slowly give way to the mild, stable rhythms of the Holocene. We have arrived at the absolute present day, the exact geological second in which you currently exist. The geography of the world is perfectly, intimately familiar. The continents have drifted into the exact configurations you recognize from any modern map. Africa and Europe form the boundaries of the Mediterranean Sea. North and South America are linked by the slender volcanic land bridge of Panama. The towering, jagged peaks of the Himalayas scrape the sky where the Indian subcontinent continues its slow, relentless collision with Asia. The physical stage is set exactly as it is outside your window right now, but the biological play unfolding upon this stage is completely, unimaginably alien. The alternative timeline has culminated in an Earth that belongs entirely, unequivocally, to the distant, highly evolved descendants of the Cambrian Sea. Before we take our final, sweeping look across the pristine, untouched landscapes of this alternative modern world, I must pause to thank you for taking this incredible journey. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and it has been my absolute privilege to guide you through the sprawling, magnificent labyrinths of deep time. I have noticed that exactly 71.9% of the fellow wanderers who listen to these quiet explorations have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you have found your mind relaxing as we rewrote the history of the world, if you have felt the crushing anxieties of the modern day fading into the mists of the ancient past, please consider subscribing. Your support is the gentle, steady current that keeps this journey moving, allowing us to endlessly unearth the magnificent mysteries of what was and what could have been. Now, Take one final deep breath of that clean prehistoric air. Let the familiar noises of the 21st century fall away entirely, and let us look upon the world as it exists in the quiet shadow of the anomalous shrimp. If you were to stand today on the sweeping plains of the North American Midwest, where, in our reality, grids of agriculture stretch to the horizon, you would witness a wildlife spectacle of staggering magnitude. The woolly giants of the Ice Age have shed their thick coats, adapting to the temperate climate while retaining their colossal size. Massive herds of heavily armored bipedal herbivores, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, flow across the tall grass prairies like slow-moving biological rivers. Their polished chitinous plates gleam in the afternoon sun, adorned with vibrant structural colors that serve as complex visual signals to the herd. They browse on the tough prairie grasses using their circular mouths, unbothered by the sheer abundance of the landscape. Patrolling the absolute fringes of these massive herds are the modern apex predators. They are sleek, terrifyingly fast, and incredibly intelligent. Millions of years of coordinated pack-hunting evolution have honed their nervous systems to a razor's edge. They communicate across vast distances using complex rhythmic stridulations, coordinating ambushes with a level of tactical precision that rivals the most advanced mammalian predators. If you were to travel to the steaming rainforests of the Amazon basin, you would find an ecosystem operating on an entirely different scale of biomechanical ingenuity. The canopy is ruled by flying leviathans, their translucent wings navigating the dense maze of ancient trees with breathtaking agility. They hunt arboreal species of radiodonts, creatures that have evolved gripping appendages and prehensile tails to move gracefully through the branches. The sheer diversity of form is overwhelming. Some have evolved to perfectly mimic the appearance of giant ultraviolet glowing orchids lying in wait for unsuspecting pollinators. Others have developed the ability to change the color of their exoskeletons at will, blending seamlessly into the dappled light and shadow of the forest floor, becoming absolute ghosts in the jungle. Every single ecological niche, from the burrowing detritivores churning the damp soil to the towering canopy predators, is occupied by an organism tracing its unbroken lineage directly back to the anomalous shrimp. But the most profound, deeply unsettling aspect of this alternative present day is not what is there. It is what is completely missing. Look across the continents, and you will find absolutely no trace of human civilization. There is no sprawling cities suffocating the coastlines. There are no asphalt highways carving through the ancient forests. There are no artificial lights piercing the darkness of the night, no satellites orbiting the silent planet, and no radio waves filling the atmosphere with the endless chatter of human anxiety. The shoreline where New York City should stand is nothing more than a pristine estuary, teeming with amphibious armored giants basking in the sun. The land where Paris should be is a quiet, unbroken, temperate woodland, echoing only with the rhythmic clicking of hunting packs and the wind rushing through the leaves. The world is entirely, aggressively wild, existing in a state of perfectly balanced, uninterrupted ecological harmony. To fully internalize the absolute absence of humanity in this alternative world is to confront the most liberating philosophical truth of our existence. We are a highly improbable accident of history. If the oceans had not cooled exactly when they did, or if the amphibious radiodonts had blocked our ancestors from the land, we simply would not be here. The universe does not require us. The earth does not miss our cities, our art, or our relentless need to dominate the natural world. The planet functions with absolute perfection in our absence. The armored giants dominating this alternative present day do not possess the cognitive capacity to wonder about the stars or feel the crushing weight of existential dread. They simply live, perfectly integrated into the mechanical rhythm of the biosphere. This realization should not evoke sadness, it should evoke unparalleled relief. We spend our incredibly short lives carrying the agonizing weight of the world on our shoulders. We believe our anxieties are the center of the universe, but the silent, thriving world of the alternative present proves the universe is infinitely larger than our human concerns. You do not need to be the main character of reality. You are allowed to be a quiet, temporary observer, a brief spark permitted to witness the breathtaking complexity of a world that existed long before you and will continue long after you. Every single creature in this alternative world carries within its DNA the ancient unbroken legacy of the Cambrian Sea. They are the triumphant realization of a biological experiment that began 500 million years ago with a single, bizarre predator hovering over a microbial reef. The anomalocaris did not know what it was starting. It did not possess the foresight to imagine the sprawling empires of chitin and armor that would eventually inherit the entire globe. It simply did what it was built to do. It survived, it adapted, and it pushed the boundaries of life forward. That is exactly what life always does. The mechanism is eternal. As the final sun sets over this alternative Earth, the brilliant light paints the sky in shades of deep violet and burning orange. The endless forests and sweeping plains slowly fall into darkness. The giant armored creatures begin to power down, seeking the quiet safety of their resting places. The rhythmic mechanical sounds of the day fade into the soft whisper of the night wind. The sky reveals a tapestry of stars so dense and brilliant it almost defies comprehension, shining down on a world that has never known the obscuring glare of a city. The perfectly calibrated biological machinery of the planet settles into a state of profound restorative stasis. Allow that same ancient peace to finally claim your exhausted mind. Let the sprawling, complicated narrative of your daily life dissolve into the quiet, indifferent vastness of deep time. You have traveled across hundreds of millions of years, witnessed the rise and fall of magnificent empires, and explored the absolute outer limits of biological possibility. Now, your journey is complete. You are safe. You are held by the gravity of a world that demands absolutely nothing from you. Let your breathing slow to match the deep, resonant rhythm of the sleeping giants. Let the heavy, comforting weight of this silent alternative Earth press the very last remnants of tension from your physical body. There is nowhere else to go, nothing else to achieve, and nothing left to worry about. Surrender entirely to the magnificent, unfeeling beauty of the cosmos. Let the profound, eternal silence of the ancient night carry you gently, deeply, and perfectly into the dark, restorative embrace of dreamless sleep.